Hello, podcast fam. I am thrilled to share some exciting news. My book, So Grow Lead, is officially live on Amazon. This book is more than just my story of starting a nonprofit and building a peanut butter factory in Malawi. So trust me, the ups and downs of that journey are worth the read. It's also packed with practical strategies to help nonprofit leaders like you tackle challenges with clarity, courage, and a whole lot of heart. If you've ever wondered how to turn your vision into reality, navigate the inevitable hurdles, and build something meaningful, whether in your organization or in your own life, this book is for you. I'd be so grateful for your support in spreading the word. Grab your copy of So Grow Lead in the show notes and on Amazon today. Let's keep sowing seeds of impact together. Are you a nonprofit professional who's feeling overwhelmed and burnt out? Well, welcome to the Lead with Heart podcast. I am your host, Haley Cooper. On this podcast, we will share stories of leadership, courage, and empathy that'll help you learn to take care of yourself, your staff, organization, and community. You will hear from nonprofit leaders who have been in your shoes and have learned best practices to raise more revenue and make a greater impact. Let's thrive together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Lead with Heart podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Kel Haney on the podcast. We met a few weeks ago before we are officially hitting record, and we just had so many synergies. And I'm just excited to delve into her world of fundraising and how she approaches fundraising specifically in the art world. She has a passion for taking the ick out of the ask, which we were going to talk a lot about today. So today we deep dive into the art of fundraising as a relationship building opportunity. And without further ado, welcome, Kel.
Oh, thank you so much, Haley. I'm so excited to be here with you. Super fun.
So I would love to know a little bit more about your background, like how you went from being a director to now teaching artists how to fundraise.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I was a theater director for 20 years, pounding the pavement in New York City for 16 years. And theater was my favorite thing. Won't come to a surprise to you or the folks that are listening, but emerging theater directors do not make much money. So I needed to do something to support myself in some way, shape, or form. I loved a particular theater, Manhattan Theater Club, where I started with a 3-month internship when I graduated from college. And I read this one script for the next season. And I thought, this play should win the Pulitzer. This play should move to Broadway. I can't imagine not being in New York when this play is happening. So I started instead working for the artistic director of Manhattan Theater Club. And it was a nicer version of Anne Hathaway's character in The Devil Wears Prada. I was her second assistant. And it was like I was the tiniest fish in the biggest pond. And I loved it. And that play did end up moving to Broadway and winning the Pulitzer. And it was John Patrick Shanley's Doubt that they then made into a movie with Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and is actually back on Broadway this year. So everything old is new again. So yeah, I needed to support myself. So I decided to start fundraising over the phone for Manhattan Theater Club. And I was very open about the fact that I wanted to run that theater someday. And I didn't have a background in sales. I didn't have a background in fundraising, but I was talking every day to people about my favorite thing. So I got really good, really fast. And I did subsequently end up raising over $6 million in roughly 8 years, all in donations, predominantly under $2,000. And it was because I loved what I was doing so much. And it didn't feel icky, like my catchphrase of taking the ick out of the ask. It felt really organic and really about building relationships. And I loved it. So I subsequently started to train other people how to do this work. And it became a parallel career. I thought I was going to be an artistic director. So this was something I was doing on the side of training other people. And then the pandemic hit and directing went away in person. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm actually happier not doing what I thought was my favorite thing. I'm really enjoying, as opposed to fighting for a bite of a tiny little slice of pie. It felt so good to be making the pie bigger in so many ways. So yes, like my background is in performing arts and performing arts fundraising. But at this point, I've also had some real success and some really great collaborations with the not-for-profit sector outside of the arts in a way that I'm really excited about as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your background and your experience. And when you talk about how you pick up the phone and call someone, when you think about that, you think of like cold calling and you think of
I know.
transactional based fundraising. So I would love to know, like,
Hmm.
how has your experience doing that led to shift your perspective on fundraising, specifically from transactional encounters to really a relationship building opportunity?
Yeah, I think that it's really been about my own experience of seeing how quickly we can build relationships and build bonds with people that we don't even know. So my philosophy has always been, and again, I started young. I started at, I don't know, 23 years old. So I didn't have a lot of preconceived notions about fundraising or even sales at that moment. It was truly from a very pure and innocent place of, great, you're going to pay me to be on the phones and talk about my favorite thing with other people and encourage audience members. That sounds great. But I just have so many great memories and so many just like great experiences that I've had of talking to people and just how quickly you can build rapport and build relationship. And it's about being vulnerable first and foremost, of really leading from a place that's very personal and specific, which then leads the person on the other end of the phone to also feel like they can be personal and specific and vulnerable. So I look at it as almost akin to a chance encounter that you wouldn't expect. So that person that you end up hitting it off with at a dinner party, who's a friend of a friend, or when you're at some kind of in-person event and you end up talking to the person sitting next to you, or for those people who are New Yorkers or spent time in New York, you'll see someone else holding a playbill and you end up striking up a conversation because you've both seen the same piece. So it's about really finding common ground and really figuring out what feels like connective tissue between the person who is making the fundraising call and the community member that they're calling. And I just have met such amazing people that way, whether it's from a 5-minute fundraising conversation that stays just as a conversation over the phone or becomes something much larger. It's actually a really beautiful way to connect.
Yeah, I love that. And I love this aspect of like vulnerability and opening up. And I think like I had Tanya Bhattacharya on my podcast and she's all about
Oh my gosh,
storytelling.
she's my
And we
buddy.
were talking
Yes.
about how not everyone feels like they have a story to share or like a story
Hmm.
like from their background. So how do you coach these artists, these directors to lead with vulnerability and that aspect of
Hmm.
storytelling? Because we all do have a story to tell. We just have to find it from within.
Exactly. Yeah. That's really a part of my training. What I do predominantly is I'm really focused on helping not-for-profit orgs build their mid-level donors through these 5-minute conversations. And so before I get into, I have a whole system. I say that there's a tent for the conversation and that there's 4 tent poles that you really want to make sure that you put in the ground as you're setting up the tent of this conversation. Before I even get to that, to what you're saying is I have real conversations and I've got questions that I ask, delving into people's past about number one, like what feels icky? When are moments that they've been solicited, whether that's fundraising or sales that have felt icky or that they've had to do it. I was with a group in person last night of a literacy organization, not for profit. And it was so amazing to hear all of these board members in their 60s and 70s talking about when they were 8 and 10 years old and they were Girl Scouts or they were fundraising for UNICEF, and that being like their first moment of feeling a little ick of what felt icky. And it was so beautiful to watch them connecting about things that had happened 50 years ago and seeing them connect with each other. So I start with questions about what has felt icky, why, when has it not felt icky, when has it felt good, and why. Also, questions about money mindset are really important to me as well, of what are the things in our past, what did we see, what did we experience? What were we taught about money? And then what are ways that we have consciously or unconsciously continued with those patterns or consciously, unconsciously separated from those patterns, and just understand that we all have a really personal connection about what feels icky about our money mindset, and specifically to what you're talking about, what are our own whys? So then my next question is getting really clear about each of our own whys. I love Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I always go back to that about our own why. So exactly what Tanya's talking about is that we all have our own stories. So that's part of my training is helping people to empower them to understand that, yes, your story is important. I think people are so afraid to be personal and specific. That's, oh, I'm overstepping, or this person doesn't want to hear that, or why would anyone want to hear my story? When really, when we are vulnerable in that way, that's the only way to connect with somebody else and get them to see that conversation as something that isn't transactional, that's deeper than that. And I just think, why not go deep all the time? That's where I'm most excited about. Is I don't like to have surface conversations. I want to have conversations where we're going deep.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about the weather.
Yeah.
Like
And if I do, yeah. And I get it. That makes people feel comfortable. I'll start there. I'm just like, what am I going to share? And again, I'm really careful that I'm not using my time with other people. I have a whole team. I have a therapist. I have an EDIA coach. I have a business coach. Like, I've got people in my corner that I'm going to specifically to work through things, but that doesn't mean that I'm not sharing what's actually going on in my real life, in my personal life. I just don't have a separation for me. And I think it's coming from theater, because it was always like all of my friends were in theater. I would just get on the subway and I'd run into people that I knew. Like, there was never like a work-life separation in that way. And I like living my life.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. And you touched on a lot of things. I had Rhea Wong a while ago on the podcast, and we talked a lot about that money mindset.
Oh
and
my
I
God,
think,
she's the queen of that.
Yeah, and we talk about this all the time. It's like, you're a fundraiser, you're expected to ask for money, or you're telling your board members that they have to ask for money, but it goes much deeper than that. And that's why people have that ick. So what are some things that you've seen because I've worked on many boards and they're like, we're not going to ask for money for whatever reason. So what are some common trends that you have seen behind the ick? Imagine a fundraising partner that not only helps you raise more money, but also supports you in retaining your donors. A partner that helps you raise funds both online and on location, so you can grow your impact faster. That's DonorBox, a comprehensive suite of tools, services, and resources that give fundraisers just like you a custom solution to tackle your unique challenges, helping you achieve the growth and sustainability your organization needs. Helping you help others. Visit donorbox.org to learn more.
Yeah, I see people coming up with every single idea other than an actual one-to-one ask is what I see the most. At the moment, I'm seeing the trend of wanting to go after corporate sponsorship. It's always, what grants can we apply for? How do we get Melinda Gates to go ahead and support us? And it's like they're looking for kind of pie in the sky, shiny objects that are about having some kind of separation. And don't get me wrong, diversification is important. My husband is an actor who's also a grant writer. That's also really important. But that's a small, I forget, something like 12% of the budget is coming on average from grants. So 64% is coming from individual giving. So that's really where my bread and butter is. So I'm seeing a lot of just anything other than making the ask. And it's interesting. I come across orgs all the time that have really strong messaging in terms of their written messaging, and have a really strong email cadence, have a really strong social media presence, are sending out 2 or more letter appeals a year that I think are all really clear and amazing. And what I'm really interested in is about how to empower those organizations to also have the vocal, the one-on-one asks, whether that's in person or over the phone. And again, I think the sweet spot is mid-range donors, because any organization, for the most part, knows that major gifts is important. And if they're a small organ that's just shepherded by the leadership, amazing, fine. And I think we're all getting really clear about how to use email as well. And that works really great for the smaller donations. But I continue to see organizations struggling with the middle. And I'm like, you got to pick up the phone. There's just no other way around it. And I can help you get more comfortable with that, but it is vulnerable and it does take a different degree of emotional energy to have those conversations. But people sometimes need a little bit more, and they're not necessarily in the range to go out and have a lunch with those people. But there's a way to do that in a shorter, more bite-sized way, and just carve off a couple of hours a week and be like, this is my time. I'm going to make these calls.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to make it a priority. And even you go beyond just the leaders and the directors of the theaters to train in fundraising. And I think this is something that more nonprofits need to adapt is training everyone. You think about a culture of philanthropy, or I like to
Yes.
call it a culture of connection, where everyone understands
Oh,
their
I love it.
purpose and their role in
Yeah,
supporting the organization's mission. And so how do you train
exactly.
the front desk people to pick up the call and
Hmm.
start building those donor relationships?
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's important in the social impact sector that we realize that everyone's a fundraiser. And the more that we can embed fundraising, not just about being the person who's making that ask or who's in charge of sending the thank you letters, but that we're realizing that everybody involved with a not for profit is an ambassador for that org. So it really is about two things. It's about really empowering each person to really adopt their own why and get really clear on their own why and get comfortable sharing that and knowing that's part of being part of this organization, part of that tapestry is to be sharing that and have a curiosity about other people's whys. And then I think the other part is just truly community experience. I'm really excited. I'm reading Will Guidara's book right now that I really love. It's all about hospitality. It's called Unreasonable Hospitality. He's a restaurateur, but the whole premise of the book is how great it feels to make other people feel good. And I'm just like totally jazzed about it. So I think that's part of it with the receptionist, the person who's picking up the phone to understand that they are quote unquote the first person and they might be the only person at the not-for-profit that this community member always engages with. So sometimes I do that. I also train box office staff and audience services staff. It goes even beyond who are the people who are actually engaging with the community specifically for the org, but also making sure that everybody's got their own specific messaging. So when they run into somebody at the farmer's market or they're seated next to somebody at a dinner party, that they can talk about their org, where they're working or where they're on the board and just be passionate about it and just share that from a really grassroots one-to-one level.
So I think we talked about this when we talked a few weeks ago, but are a lot of the people that are calling, are they members of the theater? So I've never had a conversation on the podcast about membership. So in my experience with fundraising, never had a membership base. So what is the difference
Sure.
between, is there a difference between a standard not-for-profit donor database and then a membership? And how do you cultivate members to give outside of what their annual pay is?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say that any not-for-profit that has an experiential element has some kind of membership or subscriber base. Sometimes those phrases, membership and subscriber, are used simultaneously or intermittently. So yeah, I see orgs using that in different ways. And so I think what's important to think about is that any organization that has an experiential element, whether that is a performing arts organization, whether that is a museum, whether that is a botanical garden, that is truly gold as far as not-for-profit sector is concerned. So when I have clients or when people come to me that are curious about these 5-minute phone calls and mid-level giving, I say you have to realize you have something so precious in that your community is actively engaging. Usually that's in person, that might be something virtually, but they're actually engaging with your organization. And that's really amazing. I think so many other not-for-profits would just be so excited to have a moment to actually share what they do and their experience. And sometimes, given different organizations, that's not appropriate, but it's really amazing. So when I'm training folks about how to have these conversations, and I want to be clear that sometimes that's training the development department, sometimes that's training board, that's training leadership. That could also be that we're actually setting up what I call outbound fundraising. So this is a evolved version of telefundraising or telemarketing. And so that's when we actually have a team of people who are contractors who come in just like very part-time to make these calls. And in my experience, I only work with people who are either artists or who are specifically passionate about that organization. So I don't work with career salespeople. I don't even work with career fundraisers for the most part, unless they're very early and just trying to get their foot in the door with their first development job. So these are all people that are starting from a place that they are genuinely passionate about the org. And they're doing this as supplemental income, usually because they're artists or they need some kind of side hustle, quote unquote. So that's always really interesting. But to your question about what does that mean in terms of membership or subscription, and then how do you get those people to also be donors? It's a really good question, Haley, and it's a lot of what I do. So part of that is getting a lot of times people who are subscribers or single ticket buyers or members don't even realize that these organizations are not for profit. So for instance, not-for-profit theater in New York City, that gets very confusing because there are some not-for-profits that have Broadway theaters. So they think they're going to see, just the way they go to see Wicked, they think they're going to Manhattan Theater Club, Roundabout, Lincoln Center, Second Stage, and they think it's the same as seeing a show that's been on Broadway for 20 years, when really it's part of a not-for-profit theater. So part of that conversation is truly just education, is just getting the community member to understand that they're part of a not-for-profit community, even if they didn't realize that was a not-for-profit org. And so that feels really important. And then figuring out the level in which they feel comfortable. A lot of the experiential orgs I work with, they have a level of giving that includes some kind of experiential portion. So it could be that they're making a donation of $1,500 that also includes 10 passes to bring their family to the zoo or to the botanical garden whenever they'd like to go. So sometimes that's baked in. And it really is just about figuring out like what level of involvement feels right to this person. So I'm always looking for what can we do to call this community member further into the organization, what feels right to them. And that could mean a gift. That could mean telling somebody else. That could mean coming back and bringing friends with them. I really try to cultivate a community that is really inclusive in that way, that we're really just figuring out what is the best fit for that particular person in terms of how they want to further engage with the org.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because you're like asking them instead of just assuming the way that they want to get involved, and you're really inviting them into that conversation. And I always love having conversations like that because when you find that sweet spot where they are excited, they start coming up with all these ideas or people they want to introduce you to. And you just see like the light click in their eyes and they get excited. And it's, you're doing my work for me now. But it really is about that conversation and inviting them into the conversation and not just assuming, oh, I know that you have wealth, quote unquote, was just icky in and of itself. But I know you gave $1,500 over here, so I assume you can give over here. But it's like, what's that entry point to engagement and inviting you further into a relationship instead of just that assumption?
Yeah. And I love that. I wrote about this on LinkedIn a few months ago, how the 4 Agreements book has really meant a lot to me in my life. And one of them is don't make assumptions. And so I think we need to be really clear. And I'm all for donor research. I think the more information we have going into a call, going into a conversation with a particular community member, it just helps us. But again, it's about building the relationship. It's about how much information can I have so that I can really get deep as quickly as possible with this person and let this person know that I care about this conversation. It means a lot if someone's going to spend even 5 minutes with a not-for-profit. And I really want them to know that we care and that we've done our homework and that it's really a sacred moment that we're trying to touch base with them in this way. And so being really front-footed, always starting with gratitude. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you. Were so great that you were part of our year-end campaign. You were so lovely. You did a gift of $1,500. We actually surpassed our goal by 20,000 and you were a big part of that. Like being able to share with people what their impact has made and start from that place feels really important. So yeah, and it's the worst. Nobody wants to feel like an ATM. Nobody wants to feel transactional. And I'll say it's interesting is that when I train, particularly when it comes to renewing gifts, it's really a mindset shift I have to work with them on, because as soon as they hear a no, they want to say, okay, thank you for your time, and hang up the phone. And I have to explain that actually feels more transactional than, number one, thanking them for their candor, repeating back what you think you heard from them. I really appreciate you being so honest with me right now on this call. And I feel like what I'm hearing from you is that you're not going to be able to give this year because you're prioritizing saving for a family vacation. Totally hear that. We'd love to be able to keep you involved. So here's some events that are coming up, or in the case of if there's a subscriber or membership option, here's another way to be involved. And also be clear that we're always keeping the door open. So saying, I'd love to check in with you when we're on our spring campaign, or I'd love to check in with you on our year-end campaign. How about I circle back to you, oh my goodness, all the way in December? How's that sound? So always looking for when's the next point of contact, as opposed to, oh my gosh, they said no, I want to respect their no and hang up the phone. Knowing that actually makes people feel like the ATM of, oh, that person got off the call so quickly when they realized I wasn't going to donate to them right now. No, we don't ever want to make people feel that way. So explaining that they're trying to be as polite as possible or unobtrusive as possible, but actually that can make it feel more transactional. So just trying to remind the fundraiser that it's not about the yes or the no. We can't even control the yes or the no. But I want to be really clear that every person who hangs up the phone after they've had one of these conversations, that they have a more positive outlook on the not-for-profit than they did before they got on the call, and that they know a little bit more, and that they're going to be more interested in potentially getting involved, even if that means just opening up the next email that comes in, that it's all about relationship building.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And like you said, you're reflecting back what they said to make sure that you're
Yes.
understanding them
Yes.
and getting clear on what that next step of engagement is. So maybe it's not right now, but it's not always a shut door. And I think there is opportunity for further engagement that then will lead to that gift. But maybe they need more information to come to an event or talk to so-and-so, right? There can't always be that next step. And I think the way that you coach is being mindful of both yourself and how you want to react to that no, and also being mindful of the donor and what they're actually saying by reflecting it back to them.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I also find some people say, oh, I can talk all day to anybody. When it comes to the ask, that's what I can't do. That's where I clam up. So what I train is that, and with this idea of these 4 tent poles, is the idea that there's never an icky transition into the ask. If what you're doing instead is calling that person further into community, you're telling them what else is going on with the org, you're inviting them to events, you're letting them know about the wins that you've had, letting them know about recent staff changes or board changes. You're sharing the updates. And guess what? We always have a fundraising update, because not-for-profits are always fundraising. That doesn't have to feel like that's this icky thing that's happening in the corner. That should just be part of the larger tapestry of what's happening. So if we're just talking about it, that makes it easier to then say, hey, you're so great to hear me. I so appreciate this conversation. I'm just going to shoot for the moon and see if there's a world. You were so great. You did that 1,500 last year. If there's a world in which you could do 2,000 this year. So there's a way to do this that it's almost, oh my gosh, the ask just comes out in a more organic way, as opposed to some kind of awkward, weird pivot of here's the moment. And obviously this gets more nuanced and complicated when we're talking about major gifts. I'm talking really specifically about retaining people on the mid-level or getting people onto the mid-level, which you can do in that 5 minutes. But yeah, it's really fascinating. And I frequently find that fundraisers just want to rip off the Band-Aid. That's the awkward, hard moment, right? So I find that they inadvertently end up like putting that community member in a corner of, okay, so I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to ask you, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid. Is it yes or no? And living in a very binary place that you're actually putting that person on the spot, which is the opposite of what everybody actually intends. So again, if the ask is coming from a light place, a volleying over to them, an offer. And I want it to be an offering. This sounds a little wild, but I want the ask to feel like an offering. Like, I'm offering you a moment. If you would like to get involved in this way, we'd love that. If not, no worries. The sky is not going to fall. Nothing bad is going to happen. So to keep it always light and fun and really in the moment and really intentional with the other person.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. It's like, one, like you said, being intentional. And I think painting the picture too of like how that person's generosity can make X, Y, and Z happen. and like helping
Yes.
build that vision of how that gift will make a greater impact. And so whether they say
Mm-hmm.
yes or no, that's not on you, but you have done, I don't want to say homework, but like you've built that community with that person. You've built that
Yeah.
relationship. You painted that vision. And then it's up to them if they want to be a part of that vision.
Totally. Everything you're saying. And it feels like what I'm always reminding folks when I'm training them is that we, at the end of the day, cannot control whether or not someone says yes or no, but we can control them learning more about the org and how they're about the organization by how we're engaging with them. And that's what I care about. And so I always say that it's about the forest of building the relationship as opposed to the one individual tree of what happens in this 5 minutes. I don't actually care. Like, I genuinely am not worried about what happens, whether there's a yes or no in that 5 minutes, because if this conversation is truly evolving from a place that is specific, authentic, vulnerable, knowledgeable, that's what matters. And the money always follows. I don't even worry about whether or not it's a yes or no if we're really just staying as attuned to this one individual in this one moment and really making sure that their experience of the conversation is as positive as possible. It's all that matters.
Oh, yes, that is so good. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I know that we will probably talk a lot next week too when I see you. So, Kel, where can people find you and the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn is definitely my social media happy place. I'm very active there. From my work, honestly, a year ago with Tanya Bhattacharya, as we mentioned, Tanya is the queen of LinkedIn. And that's where you and I originally connected, which is so wild with her sprint. But I love LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. You can also go to my website, kelhaney.com. You can book 30 minutes if you just want to have a 30-minute just exploratory convo. I'm happy to chat with anybody. And again, if not-for-profits are looking for a solution to build those middle-level donors, I'm definitely the person to talk to. I definitely have some solutions that are all about this 5-minute phone conversation that will not just build the mid-level donors, but will also really cultivate a more expansive and more abundant within the organization in a larger sense, and also qualitative research, all sorts of amazing things that we can do through phone calls.
I highly encourage you to take that offer. Kel is amazing. Thank you so much for being here and offering your insights to our listeners.
Thank you, Haley. So awesome to be here.
If you have valued these stories or learned something from what you've heard, please share this podcast episode or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support, and together we can build a better community and world.